investigating that it could be anything means we're not focused on any one event, which means that when you come later on and the defence want to attack your investigation.
That was Operation Hummingbird lead detective Paul Hughes, rebuking the often stated idea that a case was pinned on Lucy Letby rather than being fully and open-mindedly investigated. The open question here is this something he has filmed once he knows the direction of the defence case, or is it something he genuinely gave due consideration during the investigation? First of all, I should say this is not going to be a commentary about the general state of policing in the UK. I'm sure there are good and bad officers like any other job. In terms of the investigation into Lucy Letby, Operation Hummingbird, it seems the officers are faced with a fork in the road. One road, they may think, has led to awards for the investigation. The other leads to being associated with the worst miscarriage of justice of modern times. From what's known about Operation Hummingbird in the public domain, there have been indications the investigation has been run suboptimally. Furthermore, there also seem to be, to me, that there have been leaks from the investigation. The first media article, I think, which raised red flags in terms of police conduct was this article in The Guardian. Lucy Letby, police and CPS handling of case raises new concerns about convictions. The article contains the revelation that Operation Hummingbird hired a statistician, Professor Jane Hutton, and then fired her, coincidentally just after she told them they were going down the wrong road with their statistical analysis.
Our evidence and statistical analysis showed that Lucy Letby was present at everything.
Reading through the Guardian article, according to emails seen by the Guardian, in April 2018, an officer on the investigation approached Hutton, who has extensive experience in medical research. Without naming Letby, he asked Hutton whether she could put a figure on how likely it was to be just a coincidence for one member of staff to be on duty during all the deaths/collapses in the neonatal unit, i.e. 1 in a million, etc. Professor Hutton essentially responded by saying you wouldn't be able to get a true indication of the significance of Lucy Letby's presence without adjusting for other factors such as staffing. The Guardian article continues, quote, Cheshire Police then signed a consultancy agreement with Hutton and agreed fees, the documents suggest. The force did not proceed to commission Hutton's analysis at that time, but contacted her again in 2021 after Letby had been charged. A video call was arranged, but an officer later cancelled the call. We have had a further meeting this afternoon where we have informed the prosecutors that we were looking at the validity of statistical evidence again in the case, he wrote in an email. The prosecutor does not agree with our line of inquiry and has instructed us not to pursue this avenue any further at present. At this point, you may be thinking maybe the source for this was Professor Hutton herself. However, in the Guardian article, they say she could not comment owing to confidentiality. They also say that the meeting with Professor Hutton was never disclosed to the defence. So I am left wondering if this information surfaced due to a leak in Operation Hummingbird. If I am missing something or otherwise, please let me know in the comments. Where do you think this information would have come from? At this point, I will say there are some concerning examples of police conduct highlighted in this article. However, the idea that there might be a leaker would be encouraging to the idea that eventually the truth will surface. If you look at other famous cases in the UK where questions have been raised about the police, such as the Hillsborough case, there have been allegations the police have conspired.
This is an opportunity for us to get ourselves recognised. Those were his words to me.
That was former police officer Clive Davis, describing how officers involved in the Hillsborough case were encouraged that it would be good for their career to send the right message to journalists, to the public, and at inquiries.
We're going to put the blame for this where it deserves to be, or where it should be, on the drunken, ticketless Liverpool supporters.
The next significant part of this article, I think, relates to swipe data. I think it's well known at this point that the police got the swipe data back to front for one of the main doors to enter the neonatal unit, such that entries were recorded as exits and vice versa. Outside of a general point about police competence, if you believe the case has involved a potential miscarriage of justice, it could be encouraging that the police did not cover this up and brought the evidence to the second Lucy Letby trial. The reason that it's encouraging that the police effectively admitted their errors with swipe data is because the revised swipe data made their star prosecution witness, Ravi Jairam, at best look like a right idiot. Previously, the police had said that Doctors Breary and Jairam had provided, quote, the golden thread of our investigation, close quote. I'll briefly get into some of the issues with Ravi Jairam's testimony, not too much as I've covered it in other videos. The screenshot is from the Chester Standard live reporting, 28th of February 2023. The paper were trying to scramble down as much of what was said in the court as possible. There's a link to this in the description. Just below the 248 timestamp, it says, the court is shown swipe data for Joanne Williams, who left the neonatal unit at 3:47 a.m. Mr. Myers says it is very precise in coinciding with Dr. Jairam's recollection of waiting 2 to 3 minutes before the desaturation is timed at 3:50 a.m. and asks if Dr. Jairam always has such a precise memory. Dr. Jairam says, in this event I did. He also says, I looked at my watch. Continuing with this segment from the first trial, Dr. Jairam says, the point is, this incident happened in the window when she, Joanne Williams, was out of the room. He tells the court the incident of this night is emblazoned in his mind. To give a short summary of how the revised swipe data makes Ravi Jairam look stupid, once the swipe data is reversed, the incident he describes as taking place when Joanne Williams was out of the room can't have taken place at that time. Reading between the lines of Lucy Letby's defense lawyer Ben Myers' comments saying, Dr. Jairam's memories are, quote, very precise in coinciding with Dr. Jairam's recollection of waiting 2 to 3 minutes after Joanne Williams left. It sounds like Ben Myers was already suspicious of Dr. Jairam, even at that stage. You wonder if Ben Myers was suspicious as to whether or not Dr. Jairam had seen the swipe data. To speculate, it seems possible Dr. Jairam may have seen the swipe data from a rogue police officer, or he may have viewed it at the hospital before it was sent to the police. Returning to this Guardian article, Lucy Letby, police and CPS handling of case raises new concerns about convictions. Reading through it, the Guardian understands that Cheshire Police only discovered the error in February 2024, 6 months after the main trial ended. The force tasked an officer with reviewing how the door swipe evidence had been used, and he found it had formed part of the evidence relating to 8 other babies. The review, however, suggested the mistake had no significant effect on the convictions. The only case in which it was central, the review found, was that of baby K. I've been through a light overview of how the correct swipe data exposed Ravi Jairam's testimony in the baby K case. There is another case, which is the case generally known as that of baby N, which casts extreme doubts on the legitimacy of the police's internal audit and conclusion that the baby K case was the only case affected by the incorrect swipe data. To get into the details of the baby N case, the case is referred to in paragraph 17 of the judge's August 2023 sentencing remarks. Quote, on the 3rd of June, you attempted to murder K, close quote. Baby N is the alias used for the first trial, most media coverage, and the Thirlwall inquiry. Here the baby is referred to as K in inverted commas. Some of the babies have been bumped up the alphabet for the judge's sentencing remarks due to some of the no verdict counts. without getting into any personal details about this child, you can work out that this is also baby N in the trial due to the dates and also the fact the mother is a haemophiliac. So you can see the date of the 3rd of June highlighted in the judge's sentencing. Now to look at the allegation Dr. Evans makes from the trial transcript. The question is being put to him by prosecutor Nick Johnson. Did you regard his deterioration at 1 a.m. on 3rd of June as being an everyday type of occurrence for a child in his position? Dr. Evans responds, no, in my SIF report I overlooked it. Let's be frank about that. But it was rather unusual in that he seemed to be fine at about 9 hours of age, and what was striking was this very sudden and very significant drop in oxygen saturation to 40%, so very low. Prosecutor Nick Johnson's examination of Dr. Evans continues. Now this apparent desaturation was associated with what Dr. Loughnane, if I'm pronouncing that right, described as screaming. Dr. Evans responds yes. Prosecutor Nick Johnson puts it to Dr. Evans. Did you think that was significant, the use of that particular word? Dr. Evans' response is important because what you will start to see is a character assassination. Quote, well, it's very unusual for babies to cry other than when you're doing blood tests or causing some sort of discomfort, usually by putting intravenous lines in or taking blood tests from a heel prick. So they will cry, but once you stop the procedure, they usually stop crying fairly quickly. Nick Johnson puts it to Dr. Evans. Did the length of time, the 30 minutes, is that, it might be implicit from what you've already said, but is that unusual? Dr. Evans responds, yes, the length of time is very unusual. Well, the fact of screaming, that the term screaming was used, is very, very unusual for a doctor to describe a baby in a baby unit, and the fact it was the nurse, actually, who recorded the crying continuing for 30 minutes. Johnson again says, so did you come to a conclusion as to what, in your view, had caused baby N to react in that unusual way? Evans responds, it struck me that this baby might, that something had been done to this baby to cause this episode of screaming. Dr. Evans' explanations are quite long-winded and difficult to summarize in a sentence or two, but in short, he accuses Lucy Letby of injecting the baby with air, quoting Dr. Evans, technically it could cause a heart attack, you know, which is incredibly painful. I can't prove any of this, by the way. So in short, an air injection caused the baby to have a heart attack, which provoked 30 minutes of crying. So to make sense of the allegation, next to look at page 47 of the judge's summing up on the 6th of July 2023. Christopher Booth, baby N's designated nurse, went for his break at about 1 a.m. He had no concerns at all for baby N and handed the care over to another nurse, but he did not remember who this was. Melanie Taylor, Sophie Ellis, and nursery nurse Valerie Thompson did not have any recollection of the collapse of baby N, nor did they know who was caring for him whilst Christopher Booth was on his break. The defendant was the only other nurse on duty that shift. Continuing on the judge's summing up, Tile 173, which is a police document which you shall see in due course contains the wrong information. Quoting the judge, Tile 173 documents Dr. Loughnane entering the unit from the labour ward shortly before seeing baby N at 1:10. So in this construction, she enters the unit from the labour ward and it's done shortly before 1:10. However, the labour ward door is the one that the police have back to front. Looking at this graphic from the Guardian article, you can see the labour ward on the right in white. On the left is the neonatal unit highlighted in green, and the mislabeled door is highlighted in red. There's a bit more information about Dr. Loughnane's activity on the night in question from the judge's summing up. Dr. Loughnane was crash bleeped to the maternity ward at 1:20. She said she wouldn't have left if his oxygen saturation was 40%. On her return at some time prior to 2 a.m, baby N was self-ventilating in air. His sats were back to 100% and he was asleep. So now let's look at Lucy Letby's defense to this from the judge's summing up. The defendant said to you, as in the jury, that she had no memory of this event and did not know there had been an incident with baby N. She agreed he'd been in good shape at the start of the shift and didn't believe it was a collapse that required resuscitation. She referred to tower 175, which timed her entering the unit at 1:15. The door which Lucy Letby uses to enter the unit at 1:15 is a different one to the door connecting the neonatal unit and labour ward. So now let's look at what the real swipe data likely suggests. Tower 173 documents Dr. Loughnane entering the neonatal unit shortly before 1:10, so this sounds like roughly 8 or 9 minutes past 1. However, we now know this was back to front, so she actually entered the labour ward at this time. I'm guessing in response to the crash bleep which is documented in her notes. Presumably, this meant that the desaturation, which led to the attempted murder conviction, was on its way to resolving at this point. In terms of Dr. Loughnane's notes about baby N, underlined on screen in the judge's summing up, I think the crash bleep likely delayed her notation, so I think these probably would have been written retrospectively after the incident on the labour ward was under control. It's known that Dr. Loughnane swiped through the door connecting the neonatal unit and the labour ward at 1:20. However, as the police had it back to front, it seems likely she would have been entering the neonatal unit at this point. Furthermore, if she entered the neonatal unit at 1:20, then there's a fair chance the first baby she would have seen would have been the one that had desaturated around 15 minutes earlier. The judge acknowledged that Dr. Loughnane noted baby N as asleep at some time before 2 a.m. I think there's a fair chance that this took place just after she had swiped back into the neonatal unit at 1:20. So let's recap how Dr. Evans used the idea that Lucy Letby let the baby cry for 30 minutes as part of a wider character assassination. Quote, "If you suggested that any neonatal nurse would let a baby cry for half an hour because they're hungry, I think you would upset an awful lot of neonatal nurses." So there seems to be some kind of insinuation that Lucy Letby is intentionally letting this baby cry for 30 minutes. However, the correct swipe data may suggest that the baby was actually okay around 1:20. If you really want to try and figure out what happened, it may also be worth considering Christopher Booth's statement to the Thirlwall Inquiry. Remember, he's a nurse who the prosecution alleged the care of baby N was handed over to on the night in question. Quote, "It is unusual for a collapse not to be documented in the medical notes. However, according to my notes, the episode was quite brief and may not have necessitated the summoning of medical assistance being managed by the nurse who was present in my absence." Close quote. He also says, "I had no concerns whatsoever regarding Letby, and I was not aware of any suspicions or concerns of others regarding the conduct of Letby." A blogger called Tried by Stats has also written an article on the swipe data issues in the baby N case, which I recommend checking out and will leave a link to in the description. In my opinion, the swipe data issues in the baby N and baby K cases are evidence that Lucy Letby did not receive a fair trial. The closest the prosecution had to an eyewitness was Ravi Jayaram, and he was made to look stupid by the correct swipe data. In terms of the police's internal audit, they seem to have missed the swipe data issues with the baby N case. This is not necessarily an outrageous error on the police's part, but I don't agree that it had no impact on the case and it doesn't breed confidence. The next article, which raises questions about police conduct, appeared in Unheard. You might have seen it, Why the Letby Case Isn't Closed, by David Rose. The most notable revelation from this article relates to the statistical evidence and the construction of the infamous shift chart. The author describes how prosecution medical expert Dr. Dowie Evans presented his findings at an initial meeting to senior detectives at Cheshire Police in an October 2017 meeting. The author also describes leaked notes from Sergeant Janet Moore from that meeting, which show, quote, according to Evans' initial analysis, Letby was not in the hospital when 10 of the 28 incidents he described as suspicious took place, more than a third of them.
Our evidence and statistical analysis showed that Lucy Letby was present at everything.
The filtering of the suspicious events confirmed what had long been suspected by statisticians, that being that prosecution witnesses such as Dr. Evans and Dr. Bowen were operating on some kind of confirmation bias, where the theory that Lucy Letby may have been harming babies affected their opinion of a suspicious event. The alternative explanation is that it was calculated and Dr. Evans intentionally filtered out supposedly suspicious events when he found out Lucy Letby was not on duty. In terms of figures within the police, Paul Hughes has got himself front and centre in a lot of the police's public relations efforts and has therefore been the focus of a lot of criticism. It is possible that Paul Hughes could have been led down the garden path to an extent by callous or incompetent expert witnesses and is therefore a victim himself. Some quotes from Paul Hughes that stand out as quite bizarre to me are these which he gave to the Independent newspaper, where he said fabricated or induced illness, or Munchausen syndrome by proxy, in which a carer can physically harm a child, had been considered as an explanation. He said, obviously she's an attention seeker, but I don't know, it could be. Next, if you look at this statement from a representative of the Countess of Chester Hospital at the Thirlwell Inquiry, which I will leave labelled in the description so you can verify this. Ruth Sadiq, a senior lecturer and child health nurse, also provided a reference for Letby on behalf of the University of Chester. The reference referred to Letby as competent, committed, amiable, motivated and enthusiastic. The reference also referred to Letby as painfully shy and introverted when anxious. So it does make you wonder how Paul Hughes can say it's so obvious she's an attention seeker when there's a character reference describing her as painfully shy. As part of the Thirlwell Inquiry, everyone who has come into contact with Lucy Letby has been asked to offer an opinion. However, this reference from Ruth Sadiq was one of the main references that got her the job at the Countess of Chester Hospital, so it seems like an important document for Paul Hughes to disregard entirely. You could also make an argument that the Lucy Letby investigation has also potentially been directed by incompetent doctors from the hospital. The difference here is that, as I understand it, the police have a legal obligation to investigate several different explanations. There has been an allegation from neonatologist Dr. Richard Taylor and several others who have seen the report that the care for baby O could have led to a medical negligence case.
The baby was still being ventilated with a needle in the liver. The liver was now being lacerated by...
Dr. Shu Lee has also suggested there was more reason for the police to be investigating the doctors than Lucy Letby.
It's a possibility that there might be lawsuits brought against certain individuals.
Specifically, if you watch the full press conference, he was scathing in his criticism of Ravi Jayaram.
I suspect some of the doctors may find themselves at the end of the receiving end of some of these.
The last thing I'm going to consider in this video is Operation Hummingbird's attitude to the media and public relations. If you are interested in the police conduct aspect of the investigation, I recommend checking out another channel called Operation Merlin Falcon for a deeper dive, which is run, I think, by a retired American cop. I'm mainly focusing on the major issues here. One journalist who has been critical of Operation Hummingbird's public relations efforts is Peter Hitchens. Looking at this article titled, "If the police have nothing to hide on Letby briefing, why not tell me what happened?" In the article, he is critical of a secret briefing Cheshire Police gave to journalists before Lucy Letby's first trial, something that led to Cheshire Police reporting him to the Independent Press Standards Organisation. I think it's worth bearing in mind that there is a precedent in the UK for some journalists to act as lackeys for the police. This is from a BBC Panorama documentary on the Hillsborough case.
What we didn't know back in 1989 was that a cover-up had already begun. It lasted almost a quarter of a century.
Bearing in mind that the BBC generally have a reputation as being quite a pro-state broadcasting company, they seem unlikely to criticise the police without strong evidence.
The Police Federation and senior officers were feeding these lines to journalists.
As I understand it, some journalists in the Hillsborough case applied less scrutiny to the police than others.
The lie became the truth, with parts of the press ready to swallow it whole.
Two journalists who seem close to the police in the Lucy Letby case are the BBC's Judith Moritz and especially the Daily Mail's Liz Howell. Liz Howell has broken several stories from Operation Hummingbird, so she seems to be their favourite media contact. Her most recent article, "Does the inverted commas new evidence really prove Lucy Letby is innocent?" I think probably gets close to the pulse and feeling within Operation Hummingbird, or at least what they keep telling themselves. Picking out some quotes from Liz Howell's article, "Detectives in Cheshire Police, who continue to investigate Letby, have already confirmed she has been questioned in jail about more child murders and collapses, including at Liverpool Women's Hospital where she trained. If, as I anticipate, she is charged with crimes at a second hospital, is poor care at both units really a plausible explanation for babies regularly falling ill while she was on duty? So I suspect for some officers, this reflects the mood and feeling within Operation Hummingbird. If they can find the mud that sticks, then they can silence their critics and likely remove any chance of a police conduct investigation over their handling of swipe data. Coincidentally, this would also be good for Liz Howell's journalistic career, as she has written a lot of sensationalised content vilifying Lucy Letby. So in answer to the question, can the police be trusted? Individually, I'd be sceptical as to whether or not you are seeing or talking to a good or bad cop, but collectively, I expect the truth to surface. I think it's encouraging that the police admitted to their swipe data error. Beyond that, most of the investigation seems to be well documented internally. I'm not sure if there are leakers in the investigation, but if not, I'm not sure where the information from the likes of David Rose is coming from.